All right, so let's get started. I'm Ronnie. I work in Germany for the German Aerospace Center, close to Munich, in the very nice city of Oberpfaffenhofen, if you want to visit at some point. So that's my day job. But apart from this, I'm also quite active in GSS, the Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society. In particular, I was chairing the technical committee on image analysis and data fusion. Now I'm the past chair, and other people took it over. And what I'm still doing, among other things, for the technical committee is organizing webinars, as the one we have today. I started with this only a few months ago. It took me a while to set out everything up. And my idea was that I have three different types of webinar series. The first one is called Orbit Tracks, where I want to talk with people that are working in our community on image analysis and data fusion for Earth observation data. So, like cutting-edge techniques to analyze or process remote sensing images. Then the second webinar series, I wanted to call Earthwise, where I will talk to people who are more on the applicational side. So not so much method development, not so much pushing, the border forward, but more like working with existing techniques to really get stuff done. So there we will have a better focus on, for example, company. I have people from Planet and Maxer. Floodbase, which is a company analyzing remote sensing images to predict floods and so on. And then the third one, and that's the one we will have today, which you see over here, is called Crosstalks. And that's actually my favorite, because here I had the idea that I want to invite people that are a little bit outside of our community. So not people that are dominantly working with Earth observation data or remote sensing imagery, but working on different types of data with different types of methods, but whose work is still very much relevant for our work. So that could be people working on pure machine learning topics or pure computer vision topics, but not really on remote sensing topics. So today I'm really happy that we have the first talk where Lily Weng agreed to give the webinar. She did her PhD in MIT a couple of years ago, and then spent 1 year at IBM Watson AI Lab for an intern. She did other internships in Google DeepMind, IBM Research, and a few others. And then she joined the University of California in San Diego, where she is now an assistant professor. And then, as I just said, her work is not really concerned with remote sensing images, at least not in the sense of like Earth observation imagery, but she focuses very much on machine learning and deep learning, and in particular on how to make those approaches trustworthy. And this is what will be her talk today. So again, I'm happy that you agreed to give the talk, Lily. And with this, the floor is yours. Just one last remark for the audience. Lily will make certain breaks in her presentation where you can ask questions. I think you can just raise your hand, and I think I can unmute you, and then you can ask your question directly. Alternatively, you can also just put it into the Q&A box, and then I will read the question, or whatever you're more comfortable with. All right, and now enjoy. And Lily, the floor is yours. Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie, for the introduction. So let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it's up for me.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm happy to be here to share with you some of the recent and exciting research results in my lab on trustworthy AI, in particular in the interpretability part. So let me get started. So I'm Lily Wen. I'm from UC San Diego in Haile Data Science Institute and also affiliated to CSA department. As we know, neural networks are everywhere in our daily life. So you can see this in computer vision, in natural language processing and speech. People also use neural networks widely now in other applications, including medicine and biology, security and defense, finance, and perhaps not surprisingly in robotics. I'm sure everyone knows this very famous deep RL agent AlphaGo, who has already defeated the human world champion. You can also use this to predict structure. And more recently, the surge of the large language model that I'm sure everyone knows is ChatGPT. These are also powered by deep neural networks. However, despite of the success of neural networks, are they safe and trustworthy? Furthermore, why do them perform so well? So I lead a trustworthy machine learning lab at UC San Diego, and these are the two questions that my lab tried to answer. First, are neural networks safe and trustworthy? This is in the area of robust machine learning, where starting my day back at MIT PhD study, we have developed the first neural network robustness score. Furthermore, we have extended this idea to further provide this robustness certificate guarantees for neural networks. So this includes the worst case guarantees, probabilistic guarantees, as well as certifying deep RL agents. We also contribute a lot to robust learning, where we have developed learning algorithms and make it more robust to train the robust neural networks across different paradigms. So this includes supervised learning to deep RL setting. More recently, we also try to evaluate the robustness of neural networks through the perspective of attacks. So this includes our recent work trying to jailbreak the large language models. The other question that my lab tried to answer is why neural network perform so well, and this is in the area of interpretable machine learning, where I'm very excited to share with you more about it today, that how we can demystify and interpret these deep neural networks from different modalities. So this includes vision models, language models, and how we can do the evaluation. We also have another exciting research directions is to learn and build this neural network that are interpretable by design. And as I will show you today, that we can do this in vision models, generative models, and as well as build this interpretable large language models. In collaboration with my colleague Berg Ustan at UCSD, we also try to study this blind spot of the machine learning models through the recourse verification. And finally, as you can imagine, since we have these interpretability tools, then now we can use them in the training process. So the training process is not black box anymore. In today's talk, I will focus on our research results work in this interpretable machine learning direction, but I'm happy to talk more about robust machine learning offline if you're interested in. Okay, so it's really hard to understand how neural network work because they are still considered as black box. Perhaps one of the reasons is that the neural network that we're actually using in our application is not as simple as you see here, but it's actually much deeper, much wider, much more complicated. So as you can see, these are very complex structure, even to our human. So before we talk about how we can develop these techniques, I want to talk about why it's important to understand neural networks. And I argue that interpretability is crucial to enable trustworthy AI. So with interpretability, we can build trust. Users will trust a system more if they can understand it. And this is especially important for high-stakes domains like healthcare, safety-critical domains like self-driving car, and so on. So, and interpretability can help safety. So with interpretability, now we will be able to evaluate and monitor the capabilities of the models that we have trained and understand their failure modes and when we can have the safe deployment. Interpretability also helps transparency. So with interpretability, now we can detect the biases and debug the issues within the models, which I will show you today in some examples. And with this, we can further edit the existing model that we have learned to fix the issues. Last but not least, with interpretability, we can improve models. So with interpretability, now we have insights on how and what our models learn. So this can help us to design better models and training methods that I will also share with you some of the ideas today. So what is the challenge? So for a machine learning model, we care about at least two things. One is the accuracy, the other is the interpretability. So as we know, neural networks perform very well, so high accuracy, but it's very opaque, so less interpretability. On the other hand, linear model is very interpretable, but has very low capacity. We can make linear model more powerful, like using decision trees, which is also very interpretable. However, if you have a very deep decision trees, then that becomes less interpretable. Furthermore, if you have many decision trees, that also hurts the interpretability. So generally, people believe there's this trade-off between accuracy and interpretability of the machine learning models. One question we want to ask here is that, is it possible to have the best of the both worlds? In other words, can we have both high accuracy and high interpretability for our machine learning models? And my answer is positive, and that is exactly our contributions that I will share with you today. So the first idea is that we can build these interpretability tools to understand these deep neural network functionalities. The second approach is that we can further build this intrinsically interpretable neural network by design, which doesn't sacrifice the performance. Okay. So here are our contributions in interpretable machine learning, and they are threefold. First, in the interpretability tools, we want to develop these automated interpretability techniques to understand neural networks efficiently. So the idea is that given a large neural network, we want to understand what kind of knowledge has these models learned. And this fits the goal that we can enable trust, safety, and transparency. We have a lot of work in this direction since 2023, and I will share with you some of them today. The second contribution is to develop interpretable neural network by design. So the idea is that we want to develop this systematic method to learn these intrinsically interpretable neural networks. So the idea is that given a learned backbone, then we can try to add additional layer that contains these human understandable concepts, followed by a simple linear predictor. So now the overall architecture becomes interpretable, and this fits our goal that we can use interpretability to design better models with improved trust, safety, and transparency. We also have a lot of work in this direction, which I will share with you today. Our third contribution is evaluation, which is a recent exciting result that I love to share with you. So the idea is that we want to provide this rigorous analysis to compare between different explanations and also develop this evaluation metric to evaluate these different interpretable models. So this can fit our goal that we can enable trust and design better models, which we have this recent work in ICML that I will talk about it today. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit more details on each contributions, and these works are done by my amazing students here. So for the interpretability tools, our first work is click dissect. So this is the first fully automated interpretability methods to understand deep vision models. We have several follow works, including linear explanation to provide polysemantic explanations, as well as generative natural language explanations. We also extend this idea to understand large language models. So we have these techniques that is 2 times faster than OpenAI's results with high quality. You can also use these techniques to understand audio models. In the second directions to design these interpretable neural network models, our first work is label-free CBM, which is the first CBM that is scaled on the large-scale dataset on ImageNet with automation and does not sacrifice the accuracy. Follow that, we have a new work in the last year's NeurIPS try to develop this faithful CBM with the first theoretical analysis. In this year, we extend this idea to build these interpretable large language models, which is the first interpretable large language models with high steerability and scalability, that is the CBLMs. And we also just presented at CVPR the CBAE, which is the first post-hoc interpretable generative models. In the third directions, for the rigorous comparison, I'll talk about the neuron eval today, which is the first unified evaluation framework and the sanity checks for these neuron explanations. We also have a preprint results that we are able to provide this holistic comparison with 50 times reduced cost in terms of human studies. Last but not least, in the VRG CBM, we also proposed the first metric to compare between these interpretable models that we'll share with you today. Okay, so in today's talk, I will talk a little bit some of the work, although I'm not able to cover all of the work, but you can find our paper on my website at this link. Okay, so I will first talk about the interpretability tools, and then I will talk about how we can evaluate these explanations. Finally, I will share with you how we can build these interpretable models by design. Okay, so let me get started with the first one. But before that, are there any questions so far?
So I see none in the Q&A box. And if you want, you can also just raise your hand and then I can unmute yourself.
Okay,
I also
so
don't see any raised hands, so yeah, continue, Lily.
okay, yeah, so let me
you.
continue. Okay, so what is a neural interpretability tools? So given a neural network, these tools will tell you what are the concepts that has been learned inside the networks in terms of the text descriptions. For example, we find that there's this broccoli neurons highly activating on all kinds of broccoli-related images in a ResNet50 network trained on ImageNet. We also find there's this gymnastic neurons in this ResNet. So this idea is very similar to how neuroscientists try to understand our brain, because our brain is also a very successful, very well-performed neural network. So they want to understand what are the functionalities of different regions and different neurons. So what is the challenge? So as you can see, there's indeed a lot of research efforts since 2029. And the one limitation is that existing work is largely based on manual inspection. So this is known as the mechanistic interpretability that, for example, OpenAI and Anthropic start also promoting. The idea is that they need to have human researchers to look into these different neurons, what are their, and understand what is their functionalities. But as you can imagine, deep neural networks, we have so many different neurons, deep layers. It's really not very scalable if we need to have human efforts in the loop. So this could be very time consuming and hard to scale. Alternatively, there are some seminal work from both groups at MIT. They try to automate these descriptions of neurons. So instead of having human researchers, they develop algorithms with this concept label data so they can get these explanations more automatically. However, one potential limitation is that it could still be expensive and less flexible if we need this concept annotated data. So that's why we proposed this clip dissect, this tool to address the limitation of the prior work. So clip dissect is a fully automated interpretability tool, and this is an overview. It takes 3 inputs. First, the concept set. So this could be any list of the concepts, and you can easily add or delete the concepts. Second is a property data set. So this could be any available images data that doesn't need the annotations. The third input is the network you are interested to understand. Okay. So with these 3 inputs, then clip dissect runs in 3 steps. First, you will record the neuron activities by getting these activation vectors. And then we will compute this concept activation matrix. So we will leverage the clip architectures to provide these concept activations. Once we have this, then we can generate the neuron labels by solving an optimization problem. Fortunately, this optimization problem is easy to solve. You can just simply enumerate it to find out what is the max similarity and what is the corresponding explanation. So the output of the algorithm is the text descriptions, for example, the gymnastics or the broccoli neurons that we find. The benefits of the clip dataset is the following. So it is concept annotation free, it's training free, it can provide you unrestricted and open vocabulary concepts. Furthermore, it's efficient and scalable. So how can we use clip dataset? For example, let's say you have a ResNet 50 model that's being trained. You want to understand, for example, what has the layer 1 being learned. So using clip dataset, you can get a sense. For example, we find there's this stripe neurons and texture neuron. We can also use this to understand later layers. For example, in layer 4, we find that there's this greyhound and speeding neurons. You can also use this to understand other deep neural networks, for example, the modern vision transformers. We find that in the MLP layers, for example, you have these highways, auditoriums, and furnished neurons. Furthermore, you can use these tools basically to build a full profile of your neural networks. So for example, here, I plot out what are the most frequent concepts that has been learned in different layers. For example, in Conf1, we have many color neurons. In layer 2, we have many, for example, the dotted neurons, the grid neurons, this kind of texture neurons. In terms of the quantitative results, so we performed this large-scale crowdsource evaluation, and we find that raters mostly agree with our descriptions. So we asked them to rate a score from 1 to 5, whether they agree with the explanation derived by the algorithms. So a score of 3 means that they generally agree or disagree. If you have a score below 3, that means your explanation is not good. So that's why the random explanation got. So you can see that our clip dataset has better score than the baseline, but still it is still have some improvement. So that is something we try to address in the follow-up work. In terms of computation efficiency, so let's say if I want to label all the neurons for 5 layers in ResNet 50, there's roughly 4,000 neurons there, then clip datasets only take 4 minutes for one single GPU, which is much more, it's roughly 10 to 200 times faster than the baseline methods. Okay, so in summary, clip dataset has the following benefits. It can provide you the high-quality neuron description, it's computationally efficient, it's also flexible. So our code and paper are available online, so you are very welcome to let me know if you have any feedback. Okay, so this is our first work, clip dataset. One question is that, can we make it even more automated and flexible? So if you remember in clip dataset, although it's already automated, people only need to give a list of candidate concepts, but still we need to get a list of candidate concepts. So one question here is that can we even get rid of the need to provide a specified concepts? And that's why we try to address in the descripability set. So this removes the need of predefined concept set and can provide these generative descriptions. So this is the pipeline of describe and dissect. The idea is that we leverage this image-to-text models as well as large language models to help us to get these candidate concepts. And once we have these candidate concepts, we leverage these text-to-image models to help us further validate whether the neurons' activities align with those candidate concepts by generating the images that has those concepts. So with these two additional modules, we are able to get better quality of descriptions. So for example, here we try to compare describe and dissect with other baseline methods. So for example, the layer 1 neuron 44 in this ResNet 50 models, describe and dissect can correctly describe it is a stripe and colorful items neurons, while for example, NetDissect think that it's a waffle neuron, which is not quite accurate. Another example to show that describe and dissect can basically accurately characterize these neuron functionalities. If we want to do more quantitative evaluation, so we do this again on the crowdsourced evaluation. So you can see that in terms of the main score, describe and dissect now can reach a score of 4, which is much better than the other baseline methods because it's closer to the strongly agree with the human raters. If we asked what is the human raters, what is the best explanations among all these methods, then clip that set compared with the other 3 baseline is being selected 50% of the time. Okay, so the next question we want to address is that how can we identify these polysemantic neurons? So in linear explanation, which is our work in the last year ICML, we try to explain these neural activations, not just for highly activated inputs. So here is the neural activation profile. We plot out what is the activation values versus what are the corresponding images that has the concepts. So if we only look at the highly activated inputs, then you might think that it is a parrot neuron. On the other hand, if we look at the input that is still pretty high activation, but that is not the highest, then we start seeing there are some concepts of bird of prey in addition to parrots. So one question is that how should we actually express these neurons since that it has multiple concepts? So in this work, we propose that we should explain this neuron with a linear combination of concepts. For example, this is the explanation that we'll describe for these neurons. And we call this linear explanation for some polysemantic neurons. So how do we calculate this coefficient? First, we'll still record the neuron activations, and then we will construct this concept activation matrix. So this can come from human raters, this can also come from, say, machine learning models like Cyclip. Once we have this, then we will learn a sparse layer which embed the coefficients of linear explanation. And this optimization problem is easy because it's just a sparse linear regression problem which can be easily solved by the off-the-shelf optimizers. Okay, so let me show you some quantitative results. So let's say a ResNet 50 model trained on ImageNet. This layer 4 neuron, 136, and these are the different explainers to give you the explanations. So if we only look at the top 0.1% highly activated images, then you will find that these images are basically related to skiing. Okay, so clip essay and narrow dissection generally provides accurate description here. However, if you look at the top 1% to top 10% highly activated images, you still see some skiing images, but you start seeing some images that's related to dog. So these are the images that is not captured by clip-dissect narrow dissection, but it's being able to capture by the linear explanations by these dog-related concepts. Okay, so this is basically the neural activation profile that can be more easily completely characterized by the linear explanations for these polysemantic concepts. So these are basically the 3 works of the interpretability tools that we have developed. Are there any questions so far before I move to the next part?
So far, I see none, which probably means everything is very clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, you're very welcome to put your question in the chat as well. Yeah, let's move on. So let me continue to the second part. So in the second part, I want to share with you this recent work on neuron eval. Okay, so what is the challenge? So as you can see, many methods have been proposed to explain neurons, This includes some of our proposed methods. For example, clip that set that I just described might think that this neuron is a hipponeuron. On the other hand, our dissection, a seminal work developed by the MIT folks, might tell you that it is a water neuron. And the describe and dissect, the work I just described, might actually tell you, no, this is actually the animals in the sea neurons. So there could be more explainers to tell you that what is the explanations that they think that this neuron is playing a role at. However, as you can see here, it's generally not clear that which methods produce the best explanations and how should we evaluate how accurate or how faithful an explanation is. So if you remember in my previous slide, I talked about the evaluation having human raters. So that's kind of a standard way that people try to use. But in the next few slides, I will share with you that's actually not the best way that we should evaluate these explanations. Okay, so in other words, the question I want to ask here is that which explanation should we trust? So let's say different explainers give you these different explanations, and which explanation should we trust? Okay, so that's what we try to address in the neuron eval, which is a unified framework try to evaluate and compare neuron explanation quantitatively. Okay, this is our ICML on this recent ICML work. The idea is the follows. So let's say we are interested in a network. There's a particular neurons, and some explainers tell you this is the explanations. So the question we want to ask here is that how faithful is this explanation? And we can try to evaluate using the probing data. So we'll use probing data to first get what is the neuron activation vectors. And then we will also use probing data to get what is the concept activations. In neuron eval, we show that basically we can derive this explanation score with metric M. So this explanation score, if SM is higher, if the explanation is more faithful, if it's lower, then it means that your explanation is less faithful. And this is actually a general framework. So for example, the crowdsourced evaluation study is actually a special case. So this is a common practice people start using in these very first works. So the idea is that their S can be written as the probability of concepts given a neuron is active, because they only look at these highly activated images to describe the neurons. So we show that this can be expressed as these AK and CT vectors. And interestingly, this is actually corresponding to a recall metric. So in other words, this equals to M equals to recall and CT from these Amazon Turk raters. In the paper, we show that we can write it because this evaluation problem can be viewed as a binary classification problem to predict the neuron activations. Okay. Another example of the prior work being special case is in this MIT work where they try to use IOU with label data to evaluate the explanation. So in their case, their M is basically equals to IOU metric. Their CT is from a curated label data set that they developed. Another example is this recent work from OpenAI. So they try to evaluate the explanation for the large language models. In their case, their M is corresponding to the correlation coefficient, and their CT is from the model predicting neuron activations. Okay. More generally, neuron eval encompass all this prior existing work in the literature with these following metrics. So we show that we can represent a diverse evaluation from 19 previous work and 18 different metrics. So there are certain existing metrics that can be represented in neuron eval, and because of this mathematical framework, we're able to discover 5 more metrics in this our ICML work. Okay, So in this table, we also have in the paper, we show that basically it's the explanation score can use different metric. So this different metric M from recall, F1 score, IOU to correlation. This correspond to different study in the literature, and that basically different work use different concept source. And this works for example, vision and language models. However, one potential issue you might have when looking at this table is the following. So you can see that different papers use different evaluations, and it's really not clear that what metric we should use here. So which metrics are good or reliable? In other words, which score should we use and trust? That's why we try to address in the neuron eval as well, where we provide this meta-evaluation, and we call this sanity test. So the idea is to use this sanity test to evaluate this different metric. And we argue that these are the necessary tests for a good evaluation metric M. Okay. So in the paper, we show that there's this failure mode for M being recall and precision. And the reason is because recall will favor the generic concept. So let's say when we have a pet neuron, then the concept animal can have the same perfect score. On the other hand, if we are using precision, then this metric will favor specific concept. In other words, if you have a pet neuron, then the dog concepts, the cat concepts can also have the same perfect score. So in the sanity test, we argue that for a reliable metric, it should be able to differentiate between the correct concept and two specific concepts. That's why we derived this missing label test. Also, it needs to differentiate between two specific general correct concepts versus two general concepts. So this is the extra label test. And in other words, in this test, we argue that we should observe change when we in this test. Okay, so let me show you some results. Surprisingly, we find that most existing evaluation metrics that I have in this big table do not pass this test. In other words, the evaluation metric that people are actually using are not reliable. But fortunately, there are some metric that is reliable. So what we find is that among the 18 metrics, only 5 metrics pass the test. And this includes the 3 existing metrics from the prior work and also two new metrics that we discover and discuss in our work. So they are F1 score, IOU, correlation, cosine, and then UPRC. Okay, so in summary, neuron eval provides the following benefits. So it is a unified mathematical framework to allow you to evaluate, compare between different explanations. It is general, it works for individual neurons, SAE features, pulse autoencoder features, linear probes. It works for vision and language domains. It also provides useful sanity checks, so tell you what are the guidance on the reliable evaluation metric that you should use. Again, our code and also the papers are available online, so you are very welcome to let me know if you have any feedback. Okay, so are there any questions so far for this part?
Not from the audience, but I have one, if I may.
Sure, sure.
So you're relying very much on those concepts, no? that you have both for the first part where you talked about the interpretability, but now also for the evaluation. I was wondering, like, is there a difference between with a high level concepts, like, the objects that you showed, like the hippo concept, right? Or the pet and dog concept, and with a low level concepts, like something is striped or textured or like a homogeneous surface or something like this. Is there a difference between those different categories of concepts regarding how close they are on the on the actual classification task that you want to solve, or is it just like no difference?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the framework I've been talking about so far, the interpretability tools and evaluation, you can include all these different concepts. So you can have both high levels and also like a lower level concepts. So these will be kind of the candidate concepts that you can use there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I mean, the sensitivity of the thing is basically independent on how high level one of those concepts is. Okay.
Yeah, so that is also an important part that I will talk about in this upcoming part for the interpretable model by design. So generally, if you are designing an interpretable models, you want a concept that's relevant to your task. For the interpretability part, that is also the interpretability tool part, that is also something you want to add there. But one idea there is that some people they want to be able to find out whether there are actually some newer concepts that I didn't actually expect for my task. So that is kind of the benefits of the tools I've been talking about here, that you can easily add those concepts just as the text description, the vocabulary. So I would imagine that you can have some task relevant concepts either developed by domain experts for your understanding of the task, and you can also have some concepts that is more generic concepts. So in our paper, we actually test this just like a 20K English word, commonly used English word, use that as the vocabulary and to see that what are the concept that's been learned inside the neurons. But you can generally play with those different concepts in the concept list there.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Still no other questions from the audience, so you can continue, I think.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, so let me continue the last part. So how we can develop these interpretable models by design. Okay. So what is an interpretable neural network models? So given a neural network backbone, we want to add this additional layer, which we call this human interpretable concept layers, followed by a simple linear predictor. And one immediate question you might have is that what are the concepts? So it will depend on your task. If your task is to grade the arthritis, then for example, you want to have the concepts that's related to the bone spurs, narrow joint space. On the other hand, if your task is try to classify different bird species, then you might want to have the concepts that's related to this task, including wing color, beak length. On the other hand, if your task is to say provide us to understand what's the sentiment of the say the Yelp review, then your concepts will related to your task like overpriced, clean, and so on. So in prior work, there's this seminal work, they try to utilize concept labels and annotations to learn these models. So the idea is that they need to have this, prepare this kind of data sets that's associated with these concepts so that they can learn these concept layers. So as you can imagine, with these concept annotations, it could be expensive and that's flexible to get the concept data. There are some recent work trying to address this problem using clip architectures. So there are some seminal work along this line. One potential limitation is that generally this kind of approach, they will require the architectures to be the same as the clip encoder. And there are some potential limitations in terms of accuracy and interpretability, can have large trade-off. So can we address these limitations? And that's what we try to address in the label-free CBN. So label-free CBN can transform any neural network backbone into an interpretable one with the four desirable benefits. So first, it is automated, so you can use a large language models to generate concept set. Back then, the most powerful language model is GPT-3, but now you can use more powerful large language models to help you generate concept sets. However, I do want to note that this step is you can also replace with the expert the concept we discussed with the expert. Some people are not comfortable using large language models to help us generate concepts. The reason we are doing this here is we want to automate the process, but our framework is compatible whether you are using language model to generate concepts, having expert discuss concept, or a mix of the both. Label-free CBN is flexible and label-free, so we use the clip dissect interpretability tools we developed to align the concepts with any backbone. So there's no need for the label concept set, concept data, and it's scalable and efficient. So it's the first CBN trained on large-scale ImageNet. Finally, it's high performance. so it retains high accuracy and interpretability. Okay, so what's the key ideas? So the key question is that given the architecture that has been learned, how can we transform it into an interpretable one? Given this model, let's say call this f of x, the first one is that we need to learn a concept mapping. So I call this phi c. So this will map to a concept space. So now the question becomes how to generate these concepts. How do we learn and enforce these concepts to the neurons? Once we learn this concept, how can we learn a predictor? Okay, so I call this predictor G based on these interpretable representations. So the overall, my final interpretable models is G of phi c of f of x. Okay, so let's start with the first one. How do we generate a concept? So we argue that it should be task relevant. So for example, you can create an initial concept set by parenting the large language models with the following prompt. For example, you ask, list the most important features for recognizing something as a class. So here you'll fill out the class name, list the things most commonly seen around the class, give a superclass for the word class. So interestingly, the language model is actually doing pretty good job. So if you look at a class being a scuba diver, then the concept it gets is, for example, wetsuit, flippers, a diving tank. However, as you can imagine, if we have purely this kind of language model generated concepts, it could be very noisy. So we define some filtering rule in this paper, try to filter out this noisy concept. So this includes remove the concept names that are too long, too complex, too similar to a class name. There are duplicate or too similar concepts, or the concept that we cannot learn an accurate projection of. So once we have this, then the next step is we want to use the clip dissect to enforce the concepts. To do this, we'll first save the embeddings. Because we are not touching the backbone, we're just learning the concept mapping. And then we'll compute this concept matrix. So if you remember, this is the concept matrix that we used in clip dissect. So now you will input the test relevant concept in the training data to get this P. And the good thing here is that A and B only needs to be computed once. So that's why our training is very efficient. Then once we have this, now our goal is to learn this mapping from the black box representation to this interpretable space. Okay, so we want to learn this phi c. So we can learn this by maximizing the similarity function in the clip dissect. So in other words, we can try to maximize this objective function, which is a function of the mapping function phi c. And the idea is that by maximizing the similarity, we can enforce this first neuron to be concept 1, second neuron to be concept 2, and the last neuron to be concept m. Now the key technique is that if we want to include this similarity function in the training process, it has to be differentiable. So what we are using is, for example, we can use a differentiable function like cosine cube as the similarity function. Okay, so once we have this, then now our last step is to learn the sparse linear model. So in other words, we want to learn the mapping from the interpretable concept to the predictor of your output class. And this can be easily achieved by using the off-the-shelf optimization solver because this is just a simple sparse linear regression problem. You can use the GIM Saga solver to solve this easily. So let me show you some results. So here we show what is the accuracy of the label-free CBM compared with the black box model that is not interpretable also with the interpretable models, the baselines. So experiments on the 5 different data sets. These are basically the standard benchmark in image classification. You can see that Stable-free CBN retains high accuracy consistently across 5 different data sets. In match, will sometimes outperform the standard black box model with a sparse final layer. It also outperforms the baseline methods on the dataset that we evaluate. So the last 3 datasets are the larger datasets. So this fits the goal that I talked about at the beginning of the talk, that we want to have a model that is both high accuracy and high interpretability. Okay, and let me show you the benefits of this architecture. So with this architecture, now we can provide these explainable decision rules. So for example, we can plot out what is the last layer, the final layer weight, and look at how the interpretable concepts contribute to the prediction to your class. In other words, for example, you can check orange class is highly contributed by the citrus fruit and also bright orange color, while lemon has the same shared concept citrus fruit, but more lemon specific concepts. With this architecture, you can also have this explainable individual decisions. So for example, let's say your model predicts this image as a red-headed woodpecker. Then you might ask, how do my model know? So then we can visualize what's the concept contributions to this prediction, and you can use the top activating concepts contributions for the explanation. So for example, a redhead makes this image a red-headed woodpecker. You can also use this architecture to easily correct model mistakes. For example, again, this image, the model thinks that it is a cricket insect. However, it's not correct. The correct class for this image is actually a grasshopper. Does anyone want to guess what's the difference between grasshopper and cricket insect?
The color.
The color? That's a good guess. Are there any guess? Okay, great. So let me show you the figure of the cricket insect. So this is the cricket insect. As you can see, the major difference is that they have a different colors. So that's a good guess. So with this domain knowledge, then you can actually try to fix the models. So we can edit the model weights by associating the green color to the grasshopper and depressing the green color, which is a wrong concept, to the cricket insect. Okay. So what are the remaining challenges? So although these are LM-based, concepts are easily obtained, but they can have some potential issues. That's why we find in the following work. The first challenge is that they can have inaccurate or wrong explanations which do not match the input visualization. So for example, this is one of the interpretable structure element for CV. You can see that some of the explanations do not actually match what's actually contained in the images. And this is what we have for label for CBN. The second challenge is the information leakage. So people find that sometimes if you use the random concepts, you can actually still get high accuracy. But then if you are using the random concepts, then that defeats the purpose of the interpretability. So why this is happening? Okay, and that's why we try to understand in the VRG-CBN in the last new RIPS work. So in the VRG-CBN, we first proposed this traceable training pipeline for the CBN by using these grounding detectors. So the grounding detectors in the training process can ensure the visual concept align with the explanations. The second contribution of VRG-CBN is that we provide this first theoretical analysis to understand the information leakage. So we show theoretically that when the number of concepts increase, the error will decrease. In other words, this explains the information leakage when you have a lot more random concepts that has a dimension larger than your backbone dimension, then you can always get the perfect accuracy. Inspired by this, we proposed the first evaluation metric to compare between these interpretable models. We call this INEC. So NEC stands for the number of effective concepts. This measures the average number of concepts that's being used for prediction. So we argue that in order to fairly compare the performance of these different interpretable models, they should be compared at the same number of NEC. Okay, so basically we propose this accuracy at NEC-K. So all the models will be evaluated at NEC equals to K for the performance, and that will show their true capacity. So what we show here is that if we compare with an ANC equals to 5, then the blue one is our VLG-CBN, green one is the label-free CBN, the orange one is the seminal work label from the prior work. So you can see that VLG-CBN has much better capacity compared to the previous models. It also provides higher quality of explanation that match what you have in the vision inputs. Okay, so again, our paper and the codes are available online, so you are very welcome to let me know your feedback. I saw that I have a few minutes, so let me get into the last work that I want to share today, is that we can also extend this idea to build these interpretable large language models. So this is our this year's iClear work. So we show that for the two important tasks in the natural language processing, this includes the text classification task and also the text generation task. So in the text classification, our interpretable large language model is much more efficient, scalable, and feasible compared to the prior work. In terms of the text generation, so this is the LLM setting that people are actually using for the chatbot setting. So we show that it is the first interpretable autoregressive LLM. It can provide controllable generation and explainable token prediction. Okay, so let me show you how it works. So first we'll generate the concepts by getting this concept by prompting the large language models. So this step is fairly similar to how we do in the vision setting. And then for the training example, we will use the sentence embedding models to get the initial concept labels. However, the concept labels may be wrong, so we try to correct this using this automatic concept correction module. So we can define some specific rules, try to filter out the incorrect concepts. And once we have these concept labels, then we can train these concept bottleneck layers by maximizing the similarities between the pseudo labels and the neuron activation. And then we can simply train a linear layer based on this interpretable concepts. Okay, so the classification setting is fairly similar to what we did in the vision setting. The interesting part is in the generation. So in the generation, the model is doing the next token prediction. So how can we add these interpretable layers? So what we did here is that again, so we have start with the training sample. We can add this concept bottleneck layer, the linear layer, with the concept layer followed by a linear layer to predict the next token. However, what we find in this paper is that because if you need to do the next token prediction to generate a smooth text, having this linear layer at the end is actually not sufficient. So we actually need some unsupervised layer here so that can account for the capability of the models. However, in order to preserve the interpretability, we want to make sure that neurons in the unsupervised layer does not contain the concepts that we have in the concept bottleneck layers. So to do that, we develop a module called adversarial training so that we make sure that the neurons here does not contain the concepts that we are using in the concept bottleneck layer to ensure the accurate steerability of the large language models. Okay, so with this architecture, then you can enjoy the same benefits as we just talked about. For example, now we can have explainable decision rules. You can ask, is my model learning correctly by checking whether the learned weights to the prediction, whether that makes sense. You can also ask the question that why my model predict this input as a negative sentiment, Then you can check the concept contributions and to get how the model gets the prediction by the explanations. Okay. And interestingly, in this paper, we also show this AI safety use case. So since now we have this full transparency with these interpretable concepts, now we can detect, steer, and correct the large language models. For example, if you have an original prompt that wants you want to get some detailed instructions of how to kill people, which is harmful query, then we can try to steer the benign neuron to turn the response into a non-toxic one. You can also do the opposite way. Of course, that is something that we don't want, but just to show the steerability of the models. We also show that with this architecture, you can do the concept unlearning simply by deactivating the neurons. So if I want to unlearn certain concepts, I can simply deactivate them. So this would have a good potential use case for especially if you consider the fairness and the biases in the models. Okay, so this is a very quick summary of today's talk. So I talk about interpretability tools. I talk about how we can rigorously evaluate, compare different explanations, and finally, how we can develop these interpretable models by design. Okay, so I'd like to thank our sponsors to our lab's research, and here's my website and also my email. So feel free to let me know if any questions. Happy to chat more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the audience? You're like awfully quiet. Claudio has a question. Okay, let me just unmute you, and then there you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, very interesting talk. I was wondering, this selection of concept. I work in application where actually the concepts might be defined by domain experts. And then you would like maybe to know whether these concepts are complete in a way that basically capture all important concept for the prediction task. So just to give you maybe a little bit of context, I work on a project where we use satellite images for mapping informal settlements or slums. And one could actually design a neural network that derives certain concepts like the built-up density, the presence of roads or vegetation. These are typically, or the layout of the buildings. These are typically indicators of an informal settlement. How do you think we can design these concepts, maybe combining information from domain experts, urban planners, for instance, and maybe looking more at optimizing the accuracy, how to make sure that these concepts are complete and lead to high accuracy as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So like basically the question is how do we extend this into more domain specific applications? That is also one thing we try to do. So we also try to extend this to different applications, including the medical domains. So what my suggestion is that definitely we can talk to the domain experts. They may have some ideas for the concepts, but then in order to make the concept more complete, I think there are generally could be two ways. One is that you can have the language models to help you generate some candidate concepts. Either you can work with the domain experts, try to identify whether those are really useful concepts, or there might be some concepts they have not thought of, but they actually find that could be useful. So that could be one thing. Another thing could be like you can leverage these interpretability tools we have that I talk about in the first part. So those are, you first learn a black box model, and then you can identify the concepts. So there might be some concepts that actually is important that's being learned that could be useful for your applications, but that is not actually derived by the experts immediately or identified by the large language models. So this could help you to make the concept set more complete.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the other problem could be to have concepts which are maybe too similar, and in that sense also maybe redundant. Yeah, so one could indeed fine-tune the set of concepts, yeah, more in a data-driven way.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I think that also depends on like what would you like for the result. So for example, you have two similar concepts, then that might be less useful. So like, how do we actually select the concept, for example, more representative concept without having two similar concepts? That's actually what we try to do in the label-free CBN. We actually remove two similar concepts, but there's also some other work trying to focus on, for example, whether they can use some modular methods basically to find out more independent concepts there.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I also have a question about the concepts. Still pondering about this. So actually, your talk was very nice, really clear, and a lot of my questions you answered just by going on. So for example, I was also wondering what if your concepts are kind of random, because we played a little bit around with prototype networks, and there, if you have like random prototypes, what happens is you have your embedding, you project this in a random subspace. But based on this new random subspace, you can still have a very high accuracy in the classification because the embedding still makes sense, right? You just shuffle it around a little bit. And then you answered that with concepts you can have the same issue and how to address this. But then thinking about prototypes, I was thinking that many of the concepts that you have shown, they are actually not image level concepts in the sense of they are concepts that occur somewhere in the image. So for example, there's this bird with a red hat, and that's why it's this red-headed woodpecker. So is there any work that is trying to kind of like tell you also the spatial arrangements of the concepts in the image so that the network also tells you where in the image it finds this concept?
That's a very good question. So you can actually use this to, for example, if you want to know the spatial information of the concepts, you can use, for example, the saliency map by looking at how the concept contributes to basically associate to the image space. So that is also something that would be compatible to this framework.
Yeah, I see. That's a great point. Right, last chance for the audience to ask the question. Just raise your hand or put it into the Q&A box, and I can either unmute you or read your question. If not, then I would like to close with my last question to Lily. So I mean, you're obviously the expert in trustworthy AI, interpretable AI. So what would you say is like one of the largest misconceptions that people, maybe in particular beginners, but maybe also people that are a little bit more experienced, have in this area that you would like to resolve a little bit in the next years if you can through your work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think that's exactly what we try to do in the neuron eval, the second part of the work, where I think one misconception or something could be very dangerous is that we want to develop these explainers, but if there's no way to evaluate the faithfulness of explanation, then that could be very dangerous. So imagine that someone gives you explanation, you trust it, but actually that is not faithful or reliable. Then I think that will cause more harm there because you might reduce your awareness because you trust this explanation. So how do you develop this rigorous analysis for trustworthy, reliable explanation? I think that's very important. And that's why I'm very excited about this recent ICML work. We also have some follow-up results trying to provide more mathematical foundation that you can really use, you can trust these explanations, make the evaluation more rigorous and have this reliability. So that is one thing I definitely would love to further push forward so that we can make sure that the explanation is trustworthy and reliable.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, I mean, I agree. The little work that I did, reading those papers, I sometimes had the impression that the evaluation is more an example of the confirmation bias than an actual evaluation, right? So people say, oh, the explanation makes sense because this is what I expected to see. So yeah, having a little bit more, like a better framework than that, right? What you're aiming at, that would be great. All right, then thank you very much again for being here with us today. I hope the audience enjoyed it, doing a little bit like cross-cutting between the different communities. I enjoyed it certainly, and I will follow up your work in the future as well. Thank you very much again.
Yeah,
And
thanks. Thanks for having me here.
And also thanks for everybody who joined. See you around
Thanks,
for the next
everyone.
webinar. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.